Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome everyone to the Ghana Investment Forum today. My name is Kamal Shah. I'm a partner with Stevenson Harwood, an international law firm, and I head up the Africa Group. It is my pleasure and privilege to moderate this panel today on investment in Africa from the perspective of the investment promotion agencies. In the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic, maintaining and increasing FDI is a top priority for Africa. From energy and infrastructure to agriculture and health, a number of high growth sectors are open for investment, and the scope for public-private partnerships is growing. In this session today, we have 4 investment promotion agencies from across the continent who will outline their priority sectors and offer insights into the measures taken to improve business efficiency and the environments in their respective jurisdictions. Let me introduce you to the speakers very quickly. From Mauritius, we have Ken Punasamy, who is the CEO of the Economic Development Board. I've had the pleasure of visiting him in Port Louis in Mauritius. From Zambia, we have Mukula Makasa, the Director General of the Zambia Development Agency. From Ghana, we have Yofi Grant, the CEO of the Ghana Investment Promotion Center. And finally, from Rwanda, we have Zephany Niyonkuru, the Deputy CEO of the Rwanda Development Board. I have also had the pleasure of visiting the RDB in Kigali. We have about an hour today, and I want to explore some themes with our various speakers. So let me kick off with my first question, which is, we'll start with Ken, perhaps from Mauritius. What role do you see for private investment and public-private partnerships in driving sustainable growth, particularly in light of the last 18 months or so that we have all experienced? Ken?
Thank you, Kamal, and good afternoon to everyone. In fact, it's a pleasure and honor also to be on this panel with my peers from across the continent. In fact, investment today has been quite crucial for us when we look at the pandemic and how private sector investment is essential for prosperity, for development, for boosting growth and generating employment. And of course, with the pandemic, we've seen some setback in terms of foreign direct investment and private sector investment. But more than ever, I would say that it is essential. And what the pandemic has taught us is there are certain sectors today on which we feel it is essential that we focus attention. And I believe that as investment promotion agencies, when we talk about sustainable development, green energy, for instance, when we talk about how digitalization is creating competitiveness and resilience for a number of companies. So these are some of the sectors where we feel it is essential for us to have a focus of attention. So I would say that the partnership that we are trying to develop is essential, public-private partnership. At the same time, it is also essential to look at the business environment. It is crucial at this stage for us to really look at how we can make business simpler, smarter, and quicker for everyone. And I feel that it is essential also during this COVID pandemic and the sanitary conditions that we refocus on some of the sectors. If you take the case of Mauritius, the initial, I would say, efforts for us during the pandemic has been how do we make sure that businesses survive and that we recover. At the same time, we sustain those that are in a position to grow. And therefore, the government of Mauritius has put significant emphasis on how do we make sure that despite the situation, private sector investment continues to grow. So how do we do that is to instill confidence, to ensure that there is a clear message going out to the world that Mauritius welcomes foreign investors and also boost private sector investment. So that kind of synergy has been crucial for us to look at the way in which businesses should thrive. Now, you talked about sustainable development, and Mauritius has been adhering to the Sustainable Development Goals and the Agenda of 2015. So that Agenda of 2015 actually provides a clear roadmap for us in terms of how do we leverage on sustainable development goals to bring prosperity, to bring development, growth, and employment creation.
Thank you, Ken. Yofi, perhaps I can turn to you now to give us your perspective from Ghana. You need to unmute, sorry.
My apologies. My apologies. And a very good morning to all of, a good afternoon to everybody out there. And it's my pleasure to be here once again. Indeed, the issue of sustainable finance is critical in the world ever more so than ever. And as a country that has fully embraced the SDGs as a sort of foundation for our development agenda, it's a matter of great concern for us. And I dare say that since COVID, the world has changed a bit, and we all talk of the new normal. But even prior to that, it was very clear that there needs to be a clear understanding of how we move forward, even as a continent. I mean, I keep saying that the African continent is potentially the world's richest continent, with a significant amount of resources. But having said that, with all the wealth, it's still a continent with poor people because we export all our raw materials and then import finished goods from those materials. An equation which should definitely be reversed. And that needs new thinking. But to the extent that if you look at the SDGs, for most African countries, all their development agenda and objectives are almost very clearly aligned and synced with the SDGs. So whether it's SDG 1 of poverty alleviation or SDG 17 of partnerships and linkages, those are the things that really consume us. And so for us, it's important to understand what that means post-COVID. Post-COVID means that the world would have to reboot to recover. And in Ghana, we call it building back better. We've formulated a plan called the Ghana Cares Obatampa Project. Ghana Cares meaning COVID alleviation and revitalization of enterprises support program. And in that, one of the key factors is sustainable finance. I dare say now that in some time back, I mean, the whole question of the SDGs was seen as a project because it wasn't organically generated from within. It seemed like it was a concept that came out from above and everybody had to embrace it. And accordingly, it's not been well disseminated and should I say assimilated by the private sector where there is the largest pool of capital. And most people think that SDG finance is government's duty. But where SDGs really represent our wholesale developmental objectives, it's very important that it's a partnership between government and private sector. Accordingly, we have worked with a number of bodies to come out with very good structures to address this. First, we have the country financing framework, which clearly says that because every country's SDG objectives are different, it's important that each country find its own solution. Some are homegrown, some are in partnership. Secondly, we worked with the UNDP to come out with a SDG Investor Roadmap tool, which is a tool which gives you opportunities across countries within which all these are aligned to SDGs. And I dare say that recent evidence shows that there is capital in excess of 86 trillion in the world looking for a home. Information says that a little shade around 20 trillion of that is earning less than zero. Africa is ready. Africa is ever better positioned than ever to be a recipient of some of these pools of capital. But this time it's about sustainability. How do we sustain capital on the continent? And it's about investment facilitation, investment aftercare, getting a minimum requirement of standards such that investors in Ghana are not disadvantaged when they go to another country within the same region, particularly with the advent of the African Continental Free Trade Area. So these are my initial comments. Thank you very much.
Yofi, thank you. It is indeed a staggering amount when we think of it available for investment and deployment. Zephany, perhaps I can turn to you from your perspective. How do you see it from the Rwandan side?
Thank you very much, Kamal, and we're happy to participate in this panel conversation. Correct, the private sector is key when it comes to economic development, and as the government of Rwanda, we want our economic growth to be led by the private sector. We have a vision which goes up to 2050, and even before that, we have key targets for 2035. Want to become a middle-income country, the middle class, and all of this, we want to put emphasis, we want to increase the share of the private sector in this economic growth. So our focus as government has really been to foster, to put in place legal framework which has facilitated, or which is facilitating actually these public-private partnerships. We recently revised our PPP law, and among some of the key models that we've been partnering with the members of the private sector on include where we give concessions to build, operate, and later on transfer back to government some of the critical infrastructure assets. We've been leveraging with the private sector expertise in terms of managing and running some of the key projects or key assets which have been producing a massive aspects to do with either jobs or exports, and also contributing to the total outputs for Rwanda. So the second really thing that we've been focusing on, in addition to the risking and also having the legal framework, is really saying, how do we also provide a room for innovation for members of the private sector to try new ideas, to have Rwanda as a proof of concept where they can have new ideas, be able to roll out those ideas, be able to grow them, and also be able to expand beyond Rwanda, to expand it to other parts of Africa. So we consider the private sector as an engine of economic development. And prior to the pandemic, the economy was growing. In 2019, the economy grew by 9.4%. And majority of this growth came from the activities of the private sector. So as we move ahead, our focus is to say, post the pandemic, how do we create the resilience? How do we support members of the private sector, especially the SMEs, to have resilience, to build certain level of resilience, to resist possible shocks like the one that went through this COVID, so that as we move forward, the members of the private sector keep creating jobs, keep really manufacturing goods and services which will be supplied to our local market and also be exported to the region and beyond.
Thank you, Zephany. I'm going to come back and explore some themes around investment a little later. But before we do that, Mukula, perhaps I can ask you from your point of view, how have you seen and done over the last 18 months?
Yeah, thanks, Kamal. In the last 18 months, Zambia has largely focused on recovery. And so we put in place what you call an economic recovery plan, which the former president launched himself. And the plan really focuses on stabilization. So to help recover and then stabilize and then to steer growth and in order to build better out of COVID. But most importantly, some of the strategic interventions that we put in place to support the recovery and stabilization includes digitization of our economy. And so some of the discussions that are going on is how to incentivize digitization. But the government has also prioritized private investment into new areas of growth, which would include greening the economy. In fact, even the new government, the new administration is talking about greening the economy, and this would include supporting sectors or subsectors such as the forestry value chain, carbon trading, and agribusinesses as well, which would integrate into the green economy. As far as private-public partnerships are concerned, our government has been trying as much as possible to drive PPPs, particularly in infrastructure development, because there's actually an opportunity for the private sector to drive infrastructure development by employing PPPs, since they can source the capital, the private capital, and then invest it in infrastructure development. So our role as government or the public sector has been to foster favorable policies and incentives to galvanize private investment and PPPs in the wake of COVID and including post-COVID phase. I submit.
Thank you, Mukula. It is clear, just hearing from the four of you, the common themes we have seen in the last 18 months are to protect, to support, to stabilize and refocus. And of course, underlying all of that is the private sector, which is really the engine of growth. Let's drill down a little bit more now in terms of your refocus priority areas for investment post-COVID and how you see that over the next few years. Yofi, perhaps I can start with you from the Ghanaian perspective. Could you share some thoughts with us? You need to unmute.
I keep forgetting my answer. I believe that the future looks very interesting from the African perspective, not just the Ghanaian perspective, because even as the world retools, I mean, Africa will still have a significant proportion of the world's remaining resources that would be required to get the economies going. And I've always said that by 2050, Africa will be 1/4 of the world's population. That means 1 in 4 will be an African. And interestingly, it will be bigger than China and bigger than India. And it would have a very interesting demography, because it's estimated that some 70% of that population will be under the age of 35. So that's a huge consumer market waiting, but also a huge labor pool waiting to take command of the change that the world requires, the next wave of growth. I mean, as a continent right now, it's 54 states with about 17% of the world population, and it's going to grow from the 1.3 billion to about 2.5 billion. But why is Africa that important? Africa holds about 90% of the world's platinum currently, about 90% of the world's cobalt, about 75% of the world's coltan, about 50% of the world's gold, 67% of the world's manganese, and some 35% of the world's uranium, not to mention oil and gas, which exists there, and lithium, which are really required for Industry 4.0 and the world going forward. So clearly, the continent stands a strong chance. And I keep saying that 2020 probably ushered in Africa's decade. The misfortune was COVID. But even during COVID times, the African experience has not been as bad as in more developed areas. And something good must be happening in Africa. But going forward, I believe that the continent is positioned really to be a major driver of the next wave of growth in the world, either through opportunities that it will create in partnerships with other investors. And as my president said, we strongly want to build a Ghana beyond aid. I'm not sure it's just a Ghana beyond aid. It's an Africa beyond aid, where we'll use our own resources and partnerships and linkages to grow. And that is what the AFCFTA is about. It's no more handouts and gifts, etc., which have not helped us over the past years. It's no more just exporting our raw materials and resources. It's value addition and productivity. And that is why investment is required, and a new, should I say, foundation for investments are required. And this would require better intermediation, better aftercare, better facilitation, but also real good reforms that would optimize the opportunity. And in talking about reforms, I don't subscribe to the view that it's to be a race to the bottom of everybody by trying to make it easy for everybody to come in. It's by making it structurally important for partnerships and linkages. And I think that's where the continent should be looking to go in the future. The youth are waiting, and we need to create the opportunity and the platforms for them.
Yofi, thank you for those thoughts. Mukula, perhaps I can ask you to share your perspective from the Zambian angle. you need to unmute.
Yes, thank you, Kamal. From the Zambian perspective, we have prioritized manufacturing, agriculture, agribusiness, tourism, infrastructure, development, energy, and most recently, we are also prioritizing the green economy. As an institution, we've embarked on building a critical pathway for our private sector to engage in decarbonizing the economy. We actually are in the process of even profiling specific opportunities and also to lobby for attractive incentives to participate in decarbonization of the economy. And I think we see that's where the real opportunities for job creation and revenue generation for our private sector and the country at large. And so, I think we're all witnessing an epic meltdown of the global climate. There are parts of the world which used to produce huge quantities of honey or various kinds of products, which is not possible anymore. But I think Africa is at a place where, particularly Africa sub-Sahara, is at a place where it can zero in and cash in to optimize productivity and actually to industrialize on the basis of decarbonization of our economies. I think furthermore, let me just conclude by saying that even the energy sector, Africa has an opportunity to re-engineer its energy mix. I think we've been so much dependent on fossil fuels. But when you look at, there's some countries on the continent, including my country and a few other countries that I've visited, which still has water forces which are still not harnessed into energy. The sunlight, we have more sunlight throughout the year as compared to European countries, but European countries are currently actually generating more electricity or power from solar as compared to Africa. So I think there's an opportunity for us to package all these opportunities to facilitate affordable and innovative capital by employing investment, by employing impact investment interventions in order to attract capital investment in the energy sector. I think this is where the opportunity lies as far as we're concerned here in Zambia, in terms of even creating employment opportunities for the youth, because our population is extremely youthful. Over 60% of our population is youth, and most of them, close to about 65%, are unemployed. So that's where part of the panacea lies to addressing the social, economic inequalities and challenges that we face as a country. I submit.
Mukula, thank you very much, and some interesting themes emerging. One of which was touched on by Yofi, I think, is aftercare. Investors have a choice where to take their money, and aftercare is critical to keep the money, to grow the money, and make sure the investors are happy. Zafni, perhaps I can turn to you from the Rwandan perspective. What are your current priority sectors for investment?
I think, Kamal, the priority sectors for investment can be grouped in two categories. Category one is related to goods which can be manufactured, and category two is in services. And if I can go back to the category of manufacturing, one of the top priorities is healthcare, manufacturing of healthcare products. And these include the likes of PPE, like personal protective equipment. These are things that we've been needing even before the pandemic, but during the pandemic, we actually, everyone realized that these are the products which are highly needed, and these are the products which where you need to do your best and ensure that these are products that you can manufacture, in your own market, or you can manufacture locally, sell to the local market, and also be able to export. So during the pandemic, there are some deals that we've been able to close in this particular area, but that's an area that we continue to attract investments into. Still, under manufacture, under healthcare, in addition to PPEs, we also have components of medicine, and also components of vaccines. In addition to COVID, there are also other diseases where you need to have vaccines. So as we move forward, attracting investors, building a pipeline, speaking to potential providers of capital, so that we can really have these investments in vaccines happening. The second category, as far as manufacturing is concerned, is related to fast-moving consumer goods. These are the mainly majority of the products that we need in our daily life, which in some cases we find us importing, while we believe that some of these can be produced locally. So we are really intensifying efforts, making sure that we provide required facilitations, be in terms of ensuring that you provide service land and in the special economic zone, to ensure that those companies that can easily set up quickly and manufacture those fast-moving consumer goods can be able to do so quickly. And then another category that I can mention in manufacturing is related to construction materials. If you look into our GDP, the construction and real estate is one of the sectors that have been contributing, highly in terms of investments and also in terms of the creation of jobs. So majority of some of these materials are imported. So we're intensifying our efforts to make sure that we attract investments in glassware manufacturing, so that instead of importing, be the container or float glasses, these ones can be manufactured here. We've undertaken some research that we're going to help members of the private sector to quickly set up these businesses. But that's really construction material is another area that we want to intensify in terms of getting them manufactured locally. Now, going to the last part of the services, we have major focus on ICT and innovation. As a country, we have rolled out massive infrastructure in terms of fiber optic, in terms of ensuring that the entire country can have a coverage of 4G. But the key question is, how do we make sure that members of the private sector, companies involved in agriculture technology, in financial technologies, do leverage these incentives and these investments and be able to roll out the investment. So we are now establishing Tigray Innovation City, which is one of the major flagship initiatives or projects as far as ICT innovation is concerned. And our focus will be to attract more investors who are going to come in this particular sector. Last but not least, on services, we also have tourism. We've been having high-end tourists coming to Rwanda, but we've been diversifying our efforts to make sure that in addition to coming to our national parks, in addition to coming and set up resorts, hotels, but also as a country invested in infrastructure to be able to host several events. As we speak, we have the championship of volleyball going on in Kigali. And we are speaking about it when we just had the Afro basketball going on, which was concluded recently. And all of these were possible because we invested in world-class infrastructure as far as sport is concerned. So as we move ahead, we'll be also intensifying our investments and also attracting tourists to come in, and also those who want to host events, sports, and then we also become a sports destination. So those are really the quick areas of investment that I can quickly mention. Come on, thank you.
Thank you, Zafni. And two things you touched on resonate, I'm sure, with all of us today is the issue of manufacturing healthcare products, PPE, for example, and of course, vaccine. There is a hot debate going on for the past few months about vaccine inequality, and I'm sure that will help those sorts of important issues. Ken, perhaps I can turn to you, please.
Thank you, Kamal. So for us also, I would say that the priority has been how do we make sure that enterprises survive, they recover, and we grow businesses. And during the situation, there are certain priority areas and focus areas on which government has put significant emphasis. One of them has been on food security, which is quite important and vital for us. We have also looked at how do we make sure that our industries could potentially, during the situation, the pandemic, they could also have certain strategies. For example, some of the manufacturing companies have repurposed their units to produce certain different items. In the hotel industry, we had to look at how to strategize, to look at long-term tourism. So we introduced the premium visa to attract people that would stay longer than a tourist. And then also look at how the hotels could revisit perhaps their strategy in terms of invest hotel schemes and so on. These are some of the strategies. The second leg of our strategy has been in terms of how do we consolidate and perhaps develop further the pharmaceutical industry. As we've said, you know, there is a rat race for vaccines, and across Africa, it's less than 1% of the population that is vaccinated. And we've seen the struggle for countries across the continent, but many small countries to procure the vaccines across the world. So I think it's essential for us to look at holistically how we could perhaps develop a strategy of developing pharmaceutical products, healthcare services, and also vaccines. And I feel that the CFTA, the Continental Free Trade Agreement, could be an important lever for greater intra-trade between countries within Africa itself. And I feel the ratification of this instrument earlier this year, together with certain agreements in terms of market access, at least for Mauritius, is positioning us. How do we set up structures here in Mauritius or businesses that would eventually look at mobilizing investment from countries like India and China and prospecting into the continent. The third leg of the strategy has been on sustainable development, as I mentioned earlier. And the government has engaged into a reform process, creating a framework to reduce the use of fossil fuel. So there is a bold strategy, an intended strategy for government to reach around 60% of their energy mix around non-fossil fuel, so renewable energy sources. That includes also biomass. And I would say cutting across is digitalization. I feel that it is essential, and the government has put significant emphasis on how do we make sure that the information system and the digitalization strategy becomes the core of what we do. Instead of people moving, would like that data moves. And therefore, during the pandemic, we've seen the deployment of online systems, on the use of online platforms to leverage the strength of IT, to reach out to consumers, to reach out to markets. And I feel this is the way forward for us, and the government has put significant emphasis on boosting. And across all that, I would say private sector investment would flow. There is, if I take the case of the renewable energy sources, with the framework, we expect to unlock significant amount of investment in Mauritius. So these are some of the thoughts that I would have come up.
Thank you, Ken. And of course, the whole digitalization process, Africa is well placed. Many countries have been focusing on that over the past few years. So I think there are good opportunities there amongst other areas. Ken, just staying with you for a moment, there's a third theme I wanted to explore, which is that of ease of doing business. And I know Mauritius has been doing a lot on this front. How has ease of doing business improved in Mauritius in the last couple of years, and how do you see that post-pandemic going forward? Because it's a hot area. How do you attract investors, and often it's remote?
In fact, the ease of doing business and the business climate remains a priority. In fact, for Mauritius, it has been a shared determination of the political leadership here to take that as a priority. And all across, we have amended legislations, we have reduced the number of bureaucracies, systems, procedures, time it takes for permits to be issued. And I would say that for Mauritius, it has remained a priority area, a focus area. And I would like to join you for, in fact, what is important for us is how do we make sure that our industries remain competitive? So it's not just about the ranking, but also how do we engage in structural reforms that makes our companies, businesses more resilient, more competitive, and they are in a position to face globalization. I think that is the case for us. And across all the indicators, I would say there has been a lot of efforts from our point, the government, the different departments, and also all the private sector to look in one direction. So we have also leveraged very much on computerization on the information system. And we have introduced since 2018 the National Electronic Licensing System. And what I just wanted to share some information. During the pandemic, 36% of all transactions were made after normal working hours. What that means is that the information system today is enabling us or government to provide a 24/7 service to their constituents, to their stakeholders. So you can actually apply anywhere, anytime, and with any device. So that is something which has helped us tremendously in providing confidence and trust to the business community.
Ken, thank you very much, and thank you for participating. I know you have another commitment, so please feel free to go when you need to. Zafni, perhaps I can turn to you next. I know Rwanda has also been doing loads on ease of doing business and improving systems. Please share some thoughts from your perspective.
Thank you. Correct. We've been undertaking massive reforms to make sure that we make doing business easier to the members of the private sector. And I think it comes back, the entire thing the entire equation comes back to two major variables. It comes back to the time and also the costs. I think what investors really care about is, if I invest in this particular economy, am I going to get positive returns, and how do we compare these returns, compare vis-a-vis what I may generate if I invest in a different economy, or compared to what the average return rate is in the market. So the reforms that we've been undertaking as the government of Rwanda, the idea that making sure that we simplify the process of starting business, we simplify the process of paying taxes, we simplify the process of being able to trace across borders, we simplify the process of getting construction permits. And these actually have been really yielding positive results. In addition to, you may talk about ranking, of course, for the ranking, ranked second in terms of this of doing business in Africa. But again, it also resonates to have members of the private sector enjoy these particular incentives. So for the reforms that we made, wherever you are, whether you're in Rwanda or in other parts of the world, you can open your company, you can quickly have access to other support, licensing that you may need to start a business remotely. You can really apply for this online. And these are things which we believe which have been helping us to increase the overall attraction of investments. Before the pandemic, the total commitments of investments that we registered from the members of the private sector were estimated at 2.4 billion USD, all the way from 500 million in 2015. So all of these numbers have been going up with these commitments because we made it easy for members of the private sector to start the business. And also on the cost side, the government has heavily been investing in infrastructure, which have been helping members of the private sector to de-risk their investments. And these aspects like fiscal and non-fiscal incentives. For non-fiscal incentives, have been heavily investing in special economic zone to make sure that members of the private sector can have access to service land. And also on the fiscal incentives, have been reforming our investment codes, which I can come back to later, in terms of making sure that we also reduce on the cost that it takes, especially when they are starting their business, scrapping some of the taxes to make sure that at the beginning, they really focus more on investing as opposed to paying a big portion of the capex and the taxes. And then as a country, benefit in future taxes that they're gonna pay once they make profit, and also we benefit once they employ our people. And then last but not least, when they start generating really foreign exchange through the export that they've been making. Thank you.
Thank you, Zafni. Yofi, perhaps I can turn to you next.
Indeed, like like I said before, we are in trying times, and the world needs tough measures. In Ghana, our way forward has, especially for the opportunities, have been defined by the project that I said, the Ghana Cares project, which is a 100 billion cedi project, of which government will provide just 30 or 30 billion cedis out of that. And for dollars, if you want the dollar equivalent, divide by 6. And the private sector would provide about $70 billion of that. So at TASA, the GIPC, we already have a target FDI of 3 billion a year, of which we've already chalked about some 1.25, and still working hard to make sure we meet that. But the important thing is that the economy has, or the way forward for the economy, and even positioning ourselves as a country, as I said before, is to build back better. So we're looking at the economies which would enable us get a general economic framework back to pre-COVID days, where it became one of the fastest growing economies in the world. And the sectors that we are focusing on, of course, are agro-processing, industrialization, because we are moving away from the export of raw materials to value addition, infrastructure, because we want to reposition as a regional hub in quite a number of areas, and technology for better connectivity and engagement of the citizenry and government, tourism and hospitality, which became a major challenge during COVID times, but for which we have a good strategic advantage and comparative advantage. And then, of course, health and education. Health, because we all realized with COVID that every country, every corner in this world had challenges in meeting the health needs of its people. So there's been quite an investment in health and a program called the Agenda 111, which is building hospitals in each district and each regional capital. So it will be 111 medical facilities, and it has begun in earnest. But all these provide significant opportunities. And like I said, for us, the foundational emphasis is on SDG 1, to create wealth among the young people and create jobs for them, and 2, partnerships and linkages for trade in the AFCFTA and in the sub-region.
Yofi, thank you. In terms of ease of doing business, then what sort of things are you putting in place? More technology, I'm assuming. Perhaps you can share.
Right. Yes. Right. I mean, technology, without a doubt. I mean, that is standard, that it must happen, and we've done quite a number of things, like a national biometric register of everybody, and a national addressing system where every 5 by 5 square meter in Ghana has a digital address. But beyond that, we are also engaged in a very aggressive investment climate reform program, which will still go through the Parliament, in which we've tried to remove as many bottlenecks to business as possible. Because one of the president's aspirations is also to make Ghana one of the best places to do business on the continent, on the hills of Rwanda and Mauritius. So we need to do that. And then also to a lot of the practices, business practices and standards, in our own estimation, are obsolete and need to be modernized and standardized, but also to bring quality service to the market. And that is why at the GIPC, we've now created new offices of aftercare, a diaspora office, as well as created a task force for improved business facilitation, which include all those other 2. And then, of course, communication is essential. We need to communicate our plans, and I think Africa has been shortchanged because it hasn't told its own story. This is the time for Africa to tell its own story. So we are pretty aggressive about using social media to communicate what's going on, government policy, investment policy, and trade policy.
Thank you, Yofi. Mukula, perhaps you can share some thoughts on ease of doing business.
Yeah, in Zambia, ease of doing business, since 2015 to 2020, we moved up the global ranks from 94th to 85th. And that is on the backdrop of the intense private sector reforms that we had undertaken as a country. Currently, the reforms are being driven by the Business Regulatory Authority, which has significantly contributed to, for example, advising government on improving how to pay taxes. You can now pay tax online as opposed to going to the revenue authority, queuing up and spending the whole day there. You can just do it online. Secondly, we've also improved the trade-related issues. If you're trading across the borders, there's an online software platform that has been introduced. It's called the Scuda World. So you can process your transactions using that platform. There's also a movable property act that has been put in place, which helps SMEs to easily access capital. They can use their movable assets and use them as collateral. And then we've also operationalized the credit guarantee scheme, which business enterprises can use to leverage accessing lines of credit. And then there's also an act which also helps to protect minority investors, because what government has essentially done is to strengthen the minority investor protections by increasing shareholders' rights and role in majority, or rather in major corporate decisions, as well as clarifying ownership and control structures. We've also improved the resolving insolvency. As a country, we've made resolving insolvency easier by introducing a reorganization procedure and granting debtors the possibility of obtaining post-commencement finance. And then lastly, we've also improved enforcing contracts. As a country, we made enforcing contracts easier by making judgments rendered in commercial matters at the appellate and Supreme Court levels available to the general public online. So in short, those are some of the reforms that we've undertaken to make doing business in Zambia easier. Thank you.
Thank you, Mukula. That's all very interesting. We have a couple of questions from the audience. Let me turn to those now. The first question talks about sustainable investments. And the question is, for all the panelists, is how are you working to boost sustainable investments? And can you give any examples of success stories you have to hand? Perhaps I'll start with you, Yofi.
Thank you very much. Indeed, the whole concept of sustainable investment is quite recent. But what we've done in Ghana is that we benchmarked the SDGs to a budgetary system, or benchmark a budgetary system to the SDGs. In fact, Ghana was the first country to have done that in 2018, so that we could actually track investment and financing into projects which were SDG compliant or synced with the SDGs. And so they were done on a planning basis such that they just were not seen as projects, but actually developmental plans that need to be executed over the long term. So naturally, that system had a sort of inbuilt sustainable traction or sustainable track for which we follow that. But beyond that, we are looking at quite a number of things to also support what we call responsible environmental or behavior. So one of the reforms that we are looking at GIPC is that we shall make better use of incentives by incentivizing foreign direct investors that enable us achieve the SDGs, or who partner with local people and create, a better platform for partnerships and linkages with the local economy. So those are all ways in which we have. And I did mention that we have worked with the UNDP and the World Economic Forum on the country financing roadmap, which gives a set of protocols that make it easy to access capital for SDGs, as well as the UNDP SDG Investor Roadmap, which also gives a tool that investors may look at and actually do their due diligence on projects and be able to come to an informed decision on investing in some of these. But I believe that the whole world is gradually going to move to a trajectory post-COVID where sustainability of funding of projects becomes very important. And so I believe we've taken the step with our budgetary process, and I'm sure many others will do the same.
Yofi, thank you. Mukula, perhaps I can ask you to share some thoughts and perhaps an example or two of what you have done?
Yeah, I mean, an example is we've got, for instance, some private investments that have come into the country. An example is of one of the biggest sugar plantations in the country. It's called Zambia Sugar. It's owned by British Foods. We've seen that project expand, its venture. And all we simply did was we provided both fiscal and non-fiscal incentives. The fiscal incentives include zero duty on raw materials, capital goods, machinery, and specialized vehicles, which are used for for expansion and for moving the cane to the processing plant. We've also provided accelerated depreciation on capital equipment and machinery. And then the income has been taxed at a reduced rate of 10% per annum, and then 100% capital allowance on both the plant machinery and equipment directly used in the agricultural production and in the processing as well. And then we've also zero rated the taxable products and the agricultural products and supplied when exported. In fact, we've seen a surge in the export of sugar both into the region and at some point into Europe. So, in short, what we're seeing is by even providing enhanced aftercare support, hand-holding the client, we've seen some of these businesses viably and sustainably grow.
Thank you. That's good to know. Zephany, perhaps you can share some thoughts on this.
Sure. I think the way we've been really emphasizing this is making sure that it becomes part of our policy framework. When we did, for example, the Kurdish National Strategy for Transformation, which goes up to 2024, like key principles of the SDGs and Africa 2060 agenda. These are some of the elements that informed our strategy for transformation, which again, when it comes to the private sector investments, it has really been emphasizing that sustainable investment component. The second element that I can mention is also the ECGs, really making sure that as we invest, we take care and give special attention to the environment, to the social components, on ensuring that these investments are really having positive effects and on the livelihood of our people, and also ensuring that the governance structures of these investments are also sustainable and also instill or abide to the best practices. And number three, we from institutional point of view, we've been putting in place some of key institutions that have been leading us or overseeing these kind of initiatives, including the Rwanda Green Fund, which has really observing these aspects related to green investments, and also working with other partners like the UN, as you may know, Rwanda hosted the Center for Sustainable Development Goals. So those are some of the mechanisms that we've been using, and we believe that as we move forward, this is a critical concept and elements that we should be observing as we roll out the investments, be from the private sector, be from the public sector, or be the joint ventures bringing together public and private sector.
Thank you, Zephany. I think we are coming up to the end of our time. I would love to go on and explore some more themes, but thank you so much for sharing what each of your investment promotion agencies are doing. Clearly, there's a lot of common themes here, which is good to see. There's clearly a Pan-African effort. And that's all we have time for today. I'd just like to end by thanking all of you for participating today. I hope the audience has found it as fascinating as I have. And of course, thank you to Invest Africa for putting on this event. With that, thank you very much and enjoy the rest of the forum and the event. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.